Good evening, everybody. Welcome. It's two-way tonight on a momentous and historic day for the world. Um, we're going to focus a lot on Israel and Iran and the United States and the politics in this country about what's happening. Extraordinary day uh, that continues the move towards an all-out conflict potentially between Israel and Iran. Israel continues to hit Iran in various ways, not full clarity, fog of war about what targets Israel has hit in total, and since we were together at 9 a.m. Eastern, and Iran has hit Israel and created casualties, but as far as we know, no fatalities. The extent of that damage unclear, and the extent of Iran's capability to strike back. A lot of reporting that says that the Israeli attack on Iran previously had diminished the Iran capability, including air capability, and that the attacks of the last day have also diminished not just the human capacity to formulate an attack, but the hardware that Iran might use, missiles and planes, but they obviously have some because they've struck into Israel. Lots of conversations today amongst world leaders. Netanyahu talked to many people. The President of the United States talked to many people. The President continues to talk to reporters, mostly off camera, about how he sees things. And he continues to say that it's an opportunity for Iran to strike a deal to end the Israeli strikes. And the U.S. continues to say they had nothing to do with this. It just, of course, they did. And of course, the Israelis are putting out that, of course, the United States did. And I wouldn't be shocked, knowing the history of the two leaders and of the two countries, if that was a plan. In other words, the sides aren't really at odds. The Israelis have it in their interest to say on background that the United States was involved in this and knew about it and maybe encouraged it. And the United States has every incentive to say no. And both sides have the incentive to have the other side say what they're saying. So my guess is it's all coordinated, but I don't know that. We have great guests tonight, experts on the region that we'll bring in just a moment. I'll say a few more things. If you want to be in on the conversation here in the two-way platform, please raise your hand. At this time of extraordinary anxiety around the world, I'd ask you not to put smack in the chat. If you're watching on YouTube, presumption of grace should be extended to everyone here, and peace, love, and understanding now more than ever. Um, Markets don't love this, but they've not collapsed. Two of the most distinguished American foreign policy columnists have written very similar columns that posted during the day. Thomas Friedman of the New York Times and David Ignatius of the Washington Post. Their columns are pretty measured. And they both see the possibility that this could lead to some sort of peace and stability in the Middle East and regime change in Iran. Think, it's not consistent with international law to call for regime change. But I think everybody understands the same with Russia. Until there is regime change in Iran, it's unlikely to lead to a great place for the people of Iran or for the world. So Ignatius and Friedman both say, well, we don't know where this is going. Could end up in a horrible place. Could present President Trump with some very tough decisions. He's not someone who wants the United States to be involved in wars. And many members of MAGA do not want that either. But at the same time, we still haven't seen Iran strike any U.S. targets, but it's certainly been discussed, certainly something that's been discussed by Iran and its allies. We all wonder why this has happened after decades, literally, of Israel talking about this. And most experts say part of the reason is because the Iranian proxy capability surrounding Israel is weaker than it's been. And so the prospect of Iranian allies and proxies hitting back is lower. On the other hand, they still have, and you can read about this in those two columns, they still have some pretty tough allies, Al Qaeda and others, who may unite with them here to strike back. So Sabbath in Israel, about to be sundown in the East Coast here. And so we'll see how that affects how things go. The Israelis, of course, will continue to fight as needed because of the special circumstances. Um, there's video of strikes. There continues to be extraordinary reporting about how the Israelis pulled this off, a combination of human intelligence and technological savvy. I think it's in the Ignatius column. It might be the Friedman column. I read them both back to back, but one of them reports on the degree to which the regime is so hated in Tehran that Israel has had a great deal of success recruiting senior Iranian officials to be spies for them and informants for them, and that has destabilized the Iranian government because they're well aware that the person sitting next to them in a meeting could be um, someone working for Israel. So uh, there's nobody in the world who can tell you where this is going next, but we do have great guests to talk about what they see. And there's a little bit of news elsewhere in the United States. A lot of buildup for tomorrow. President's parade, military parade, the president's birthday, the parade honoring the U.S. military, as well as the No Kings marches across the country. Uh, a judge denied Muhammad Kali's release. That's the former Columbia graduate student, and Kilmar Abrego Garcia pleaded not guilty. Again, there's some other smaller things out there, but let's bring in our guests, and I just want them to overview how they see where things are, with a particular focus on, of course, Israel, the United States, and and Iran. Um, okay. Couldn't be happier to have our first guest here. I've seen him on TV. He's extraordinarily great at communicating and extraordinarily knowledgeable as an expert on national security and defense and Iran. Uh, Behnam Ben Taleblu, if I pronounce your name adequately or correctly.
Yep.
Very,
Thank you.
very grateful for you joining. I'm sure a lot of people here know you, but I bet there's at least some who don't. So just tell people, how have you developed your expertise on Iran, national security, defense in the Middle East?
Well, first and foremost, pleasure to be with you. I've been working at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, covering the breadth and depth of the Iran threat for 13 years now. Been in Washington, D.C. for 19 years, working this issue, studying it, researching it in various institutions and places. And I myself am a first generation Iranian American living and breathing this issue and monitoring the Persian press and the debate on the ground every single day.
Okay, a few more questions for you. Are you an academic? Have you ever served in the government?
No, I'm the deadweight loss, so neither academic nor government.
All right.
I actually have just a MA, not a PhD, and have not served formally in government. I've done consulting on the side, but never formally in government.
All right.
Um,
And you say first generation. Who in your family came to the United States under what circumstances?
Both mom and dad came to the United States, originally from Iran, but they actually met and got engaged in Italy. My dad had left Iran long before the revolution, just working in Europe. And my mother, slightly more political family. Her father was a reporter before the revolution in Iran, and he was jailed by the revolutionaries. And once they got him out on bail, the whole mother side of the family uprooted.
Do you have family there still?
Not really, no.
Not really. And how do you feel about the Iranian regime?
Not the the regime in Iran. I never say Iranian regime because the Iranian is a positive word and regime is a pejorative modifier.
Right.
So Iranian should be a good thing, especially because one of the most pro-American and pro-Israel populations in the Middle East is Iranian. Yeah, the regime is despicable. I mean, these guys mean what they say. They've been saying death to America for 46 years. They've been saying death to Israel for 46 years. I find it to be quite plain that everyone with a little bit of a head and a little bit of a heart would strongly, strongly dislike them.
I'm going to stay with you, and then we're going to bring in the others because I just want to do some basics with you. Do you think that it's possible or somewhat likely that the circumstances of the conflict could lead to regime change, or does the government have a stranglehold on power?
The government unfortunately does control all of the sources of revenue and violence, and you've seen multiple iterations of anti-regime street protests be violently crushed, and in fact the regime bring on new ways, high-tech ways to enable their censorship and dissent and repression. But that doesn't mean the Iranian people have stopped trying. So long as the people in there are continuing to fight for freedom, and when you zoom out for a minute, Iran is a little bit different than some of its neighbors. It's been protesting, its people have been protesting for representative government for over a century in that part of the world. So it's an important story to tell. And there's very few places outside of Israel where strategy and values can be on the same side of the ledger in the Middle East. And I think certainly supporting the Iranian people and flipping the script on the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism is both goodbye your head and goodbye your heart.
Yeah, and Prime Minister Netanyahu made an appeal to the Iranian people that I thought was quite moving and smart. Two more questions for you, then we'll bring in the others. As we know, the outlines, not the complete package, of the deal that the president was trying to negotiate with Iran to uh, contain their nuclear capabilities. Are you definitely for it, definitely against it, or would need to know more?
Well, the challenge is we don't know all the contours of the deal the president was negotiating, but if the statements made by the president um, within the past 6 to 8 weeks are any indication of the kind of deal he would get, that would be a deal qualitatively better than the 2015 Obama era deal, and one that would have no enrichment, no reprocessing, and full dismantlement. In fact, I authored a monograph about the only deal that we should be taking if you're going to be doing negotiations with the Islamic Republic. But my advice prior to the president entering negotiations was actually push away from the table, escalate max pressure, make sure Iran knows who is the superpower and who is the supplicant.
Is it possible that the presidents of the United States offer or suggestion that Iran come to the table now and negotiate the deal and end the military conflict? Is it possible that they could agree to that? It doesn't seem
It,
likely to me.
it certainly will not be heated now, particularly after the strike, but there is an inherent logic in once you can't use non-peaceful means to reach a diplomatic end, to begin to use, once you can't use peaceful means to reach a diplomatic end, to use non-peaceful means to reach that end. In some way, this is basically escalate to de-escalate. I personally think the president thought it would have been a little bit easier to get an Iran nuclear deal, particularly with the restoration of max pressure. I think he would have thought it would have been happening faster too, and he would not have had to spend his political capital as much as he did in the past 2 months trying to create the political space for negotiations. And I think he grew frustrated and gave the Israelis a pale green light. But I still think the president has been remarkably consistent on this one issue, even before entering office on term one. You can go track his statements. He's critical of the Obama era deal, but he himself wants a deal. And in that way, he might pursue limited military means to potentially more diplomatic or peaceful ends.
All right, there are sirens in Jerusalem right now. We'll watch that and we'll take that live if we see something there. I really do think this is the last question I'm going to ask you, and then I'm going to go to AJ. Overall, how do you feel about what's happened and where we're headed here? Are you feeling hopeful, anxious? How are you feeling about what's happening?
Naturally, when you see high flying projectiles across the Middle East, a region already beset by a lot of war, you get more anxious. You're obviously human. But at the same time, once you see so many of the oppressors and repressors of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard who are basically taken out by Israel, obviously that creates a little bit of room for hope and cautious optimism. But we're certainly nowhere out of the darkness yet. There's still large swaths of the Iranian nuclear program in place. There's large swaths of the Iranian ballistic missile program in place. And the real art of the deal here, in my view, is to get the Americans and the Israelis to realize that it's not about sanctions or military pressure. It's about empowering the folks on the street who are really the front lines of the best policy towards flipping the script on the mullahs. I mean, just very briefly, watching what was coming out of Iran, there was tons of attention paid to the domestic scene by the regime, even within obituaries of these IRGC generals that were killed. The regime spent paragraphs trying to remind people if you post incorrect information on social media, you'll be fined or you'll be censored, or actually worse, that something else could happen.
Very grateful for you being here. Thank you. All right,
Thank you.
your first time here. Our other two guests are regulars. Hogan Gidley might as well be in the opening credits. And Olympic athlete AJ Edelman is here. Are you still in Japan?
Yeah, I'll be training here until September.
All right, konnichiwa. Um, AJ is one of the most, how do I say this correctly? AJ is more able to combine intellect and passion than anybody I know. Explain what you feel and think, both passionately and thoughtfully. Sometimes people have trouble doing them both. Um, how do you feel about what's happening? Are you anxious? Are you energized? How are you feeling about what's happening?
There's a lot to be proud of. There's an amazing amount of strategic goals that have been met and far exceeded, I think, what anyone expected. Because in a campaign of bombing is not an exact expect, bombing is not a science, right? Many times when you bomb, you expect to hit, let's say, 30% of your target. Israel has really surgically achieved some miraculous results and has complete air superiority over Iran. But there is a lot of reason to have some worry here. Iran has thousands of ballistic missiles, and Israel is a very small country. Right, landmass wise, just in terms of their defense systems, it's easy to overwhelm a system with hundreds of ballistic rockets at the same time. So what we saw yesterday was, I believe, 7 rockets got through on the first barrage of 100, and 21 people were initially injured. So there's still a lot that's uncertain, but uh, but I think most of what many of us are feeling right now is wow, like look at us go, so to speak.
Yeah.
But there is an amazing, there is a road ahead. Just because the strategic objectives have been met, it's kind of like Russia throwing people endlessly to the front lines. They have a lot of material to throw at the state, and so there is quite a bit of danger ahead.
How do you feel about how the American government has been speaking publicly about things since last night?
I think the public posturing has been good. I have been wondering whether the non-direct involvement was initially to keep NATO Article 5 on the table. For those of us who don't spend all of our time reading about NATO Article 5, it's the collective defense provision. That doesn't kick in if there is an attack initiated by a NATO member. But if an attack is made on a NATO member, and this was used after 9/11 to invoke the collective defense after the U.S. was hit on its own soil. My initial thought was, if the U.S. is indeed so supportive of this, why didn't they join in with some of their unique capabilities, some of the B-2 bombers, some bunker busters, some MOABs that could penetrate deep into the Natanz or Fordo underground facilities? I think what we've seen is a great deal of support, to the point where France, which has not been particularly friendly, in terms of their rhetoric in the last couple of years, but certainly in the last few months, came out to help try to swat down some of these ballistic missiles. I think the posturing has been good. The question that I continue to have is why there's any mention of still engaging with the regime. The regime has exposed itself as a nefarious bad actor. All pretense is gone. So when you start to talk about things like coming to the negotiating table, what is all this for? This action on Israel's part is because of a firm belief that no matter what agreement would ever be agreed to by these particular players, it wouldn't be held to, because they're bad actors. They mean nothing but harm. And so I'm not really sure. I find it quite problematic when I see, oh, well, maybe they'll come to the table now. No, right? There's a war going on for a very particular reason. So I'm curious as to whether it's strategic, uncertainty, as to whether it's to sow the doubt as to what the U.S.'s involvement is going to be. But I think from a political perspective, Trump is someone who's incredibly adept at triangulating the political situation at home, and particularly with his base, which is quite torn right now. His base did not want this. His base does not like direct U.S. involvement and feared being pulled into this conflict. I think a lot of those fears have been proved incorrect. Right? There's not World War III going on. The U.S. hasn't been pulled into some conflict that thousands of people, like Tucker Carlson said, thousands of American servicemen were going to die and everything. Like, it just hasn't happened. But it does seem like as Israel's strategic wins mount, the likelihood of more direct U.S. involvement starts to mount as well, as it becomes safer to kind of enter. So I think, right now, I think I'm very comfortable with where it's at. And I would have to think that Bibi probably would not have undertaken such a dangerous gambit here, because indeed it is a very dangerous gambit. Right? I think we'll get into this a little later if we have time, as to what Israel knew about the regime's plans. There are plans. I'd like to talk about them later. There were plans that were uncovered, actual attack plans with Hamas and Hezbollah to wipe out Israel. It wasn't just talk. They were actual formulated plans. And so I think, this was a particularly dangerous gambit, and I don't think Bibi would have undertaken it without some sort of sense that the U.S. would at some point join.
Okay. It's being widely, thank you for all that. It's being widely reported that there's a big wave of Iranian missile strikes either hitting or headed to Israel right now. So again, Sam will be ready to bring in CNN or Fox, which seem to have the best live pictures of this now. Hogan Gidley served in the first Trump administration, very close to many people in the administration. Hogan, first I want to have you pick up on what AJ mentioned, which is the president and most of his supporters do not want to see the United States involved in a war. It's true that no Americans have been hit yet, but Iran or Iran proxies could do that presumably somewhat easily, even hitting one U.S. Structure or killing an American. How do you think the president is thinking about the U.S. role right now?
Well, I mean, I hesitate to say anything other than what he has actually said, which is we
Yeah.
gave them a 60-day window. We're at the 61st day now. Hands off. Let's let Israel do what Israel is going to do. And he has a very deep understanding of the region based on the last term, the advisors he had around him, the studying, the understanding of what he actually encountered the first time around. Now we're obviously at a different place with these tensions ratcheting up. Iran is not shy about saying what it wants to do and how it wants to go about doing it. With death and destruction has always been kind of their platform. So Donald Trump understands that. I will say, while he is hesitant to get involved in anything, he's also been very clear. You attack someone um, from America, you attack our interest, there's going to be hell to pay for it. So what I'm waiting to see is exactly how far Iran goes. And the statements made by officials here in the United States and some in the Trump administration kind of all parrot that same idea, which is, in essence, we didn't have anything to do with this. However, understand that if this moves forward and you come after us, we're going to hit back really, really hard, which is Trump's MO and has been both politically and with policy as well, both domestically and foreign policy. So I'm watching, my TV's on now, and I'm trying to catch some of these clips as they happen too. Very dangerous situation. So prayers and thoughts for the folks over there as well.
Hogan, what would you say the best case is for the United States here? Is it regime change?
Look, the best case, what Donald Trump wants, obviously, is no more bloodshed. He doesn't want death. He doesn't want destruction. He did everything he could in his first term to prevent that. He did so. This is one of those things he doesn't like because it's messy and it's foreign policy is so nuanced and so difficult. People always just think it's just one thing and you can fix this and do all these things, but especially in the Middle East, where this has been raging on for generations and generations and generations. So I don't know what he's looking for from an outcome other than for everything just to stop. He wants he wants Iran to be prosperous. He wants their people to be free. Of course, he's not going to use American assets to try and push a regime change. But would the world be safer if Iran had different leaders and no desires for nuclear weapons and death and destruction? Absolutely.
Yeah.
What form that takes and what role America plays in that, I guess, still remains to be seen.
AJ and Behnam, do you guys know each other?
We actually met, if I'm not mistaken, many, many years before COVID in the hallways of a couple of TV stations in Washington, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Fact check true.
No, you're talking about Hogan or
I,
you're talking about
I,
AJ?
AJ.
Yeah. Well, Hogan, were you there too?
I've met him before. I think I've met Benham before,
Okay.
but I may be wrong.
All right. Regardless of whose recollections, right? And you got to forgive AJ. He meets a lot of people. It's kind of a man about the planet. AJ, do you have any questions for Benham?
not particularly. I prefer to let people talk about their expertise.
Okay.
But
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. I want to bring in Haley. Haley is a great member of our community, and her mom lives in uh, Tel Aviv. And Haley, I'm going to bring you in and ask you to set up the video that you were nice enough to share with us and tell us what's going on with your mom.
Yeah. My mom lives in Ramat Gan, which is a really big suburb right outside of Tel Aviv. Today, in the first wave of the attacks, there was two direct hits within the Tel Aviv area, one in Tel Aviv former and one in Ramat Gan. This was 2 streets away from where my mother lives, which means, I mean, like there were avenues and buildings in between. Thankfully, she's fine. Everyone's fine. But this is the damage that happened to her apartment, just being as far away as she was from the direct impact.
Okay, so let's there's number 7, Sam. Take it full before you play it, if you would, so everybody can see it.
אנחנו ממתינים עדיין לאינדיקציה ממערכת הביטחון, מצה"ל, לגבי סדר הגודל של המטח. האחרון היה של כ100 טילים, רובם יורד, אבל ראינו גם היו נפילות. אנחנו מיד על הדבר הזה ונוכל לעדכן בעוד זמן קצר. כן, אלו העדכונים.
All right. How is she feeling? How's she viewing what's going on right now?
Well, usually, I mean, unfortunately, Israelis are pretty desensitized to all of it for the last 2 years, but this one was very frightening. Also because when it came to the this specific with Iran, the Israeli government implemented messages on their phones. So there's a lot of messages that come before the sirens, and it creates an atmosphere of just sheer terror, honestly. But this one was pretty scary for her. But again, thankfully they have safe rooms, and she was totally fine. But it just shows like the actual impact of the ballistic missile and how powerful it really is.
Yeah. Haley, thank you. Keep us posted. I'm grateful to you for coming on. All right, I'm going to bring folks in. As always, please unmute, say where you are, what's on your mind for our great guests, and we'll keep watching for live pictures that we want to take or reporting that we get or see. But I'll just say again, this platform is supposed to be different than other places. I see extraordinarily offensive things in the chat, not universally, but just amazing to me. If you want to be here, the whole ethos of this is to not criticize people personally or say offensive things. Spirited debate's great, but it's just not what this is supposed to be about. So I just urge you, do not put smack in the chat here or on YouTube, wherever you're watching the program. It's just not consistent with what kind of conversations we're trying to have. All right. Futile, but I like to say it, even though I know it's a waste of my breath. All right. Nothing better than a Persian Jew on a night like this. Here is your name pronounced Michelle?
Yeah.
Yeah. Welcome in. Tell folks where you are and what's on your mind for our guests.
So I'm Persian. I was originally born in Tehran, but we moved to Los Angeles like 10 years ago. But my parents are right now in Tehran, close to like the middle of the town, like downtown, basically. And like basically they've been hearing like since last night stop like the bombs they hear like close to them now actually, which is like. But my question is, what do you think? How long do you think this is gonna go for? Like, I see like Israel is saying a day or a week, or do you think Iran is gonna back down? And what do you think the end result is gonna be?
Yeah,
Like, is there gonna be regime change?
Yeah, these are all great questions that none of us can answer, but we're going to do our best. Behnam, you first, please.
Sure, we're going to give our best to guesstimate it, and salam oduru to you. Pleasure to meet you. Listen, thank you. Listen, I think honestly, based on what the Israelis themselves have been saying, they treat this as a campaign, not an operation. And that's a critical linguistic difference that is not necessarily accounted for in our press here, in the Western press in the States. Everything is often seen as a one-off. Do they have the capability to do this one thing? When you see the reporting actually now showing that, the Israelis are thinking about this as a chronology, as a menu of operations that they can scale up or scale down over time. I think the Israelis have accounted for this larger Iranian response just because the volume of ballistic missiles in the first 2 waves is still less than the October 1st ballistic missile attack does not make it any less lethal. I think the regime indeed was caught off guard. That's why even the US had those, basing and family rotations movements out of some of the Arab states of the Persian Gulf because they anticipated something that could trigger Iran to widen the front, not just against Israel, but potentially against the US. I think that's low probability, but very high impact if it happens. So I would say high alert for at least 2 weeks. And one wonders if the Israelis might be able to drive the Iranians to make a mistake. This is when we're talking about policies that we prefer or not prefer. This is a policy that I would actually advocate for. I know, Mark, you mentioned deal or no deal, and you mentioned later on the prospect of military conflict or how I see it evolving. I think you want to put the regime in a lose-lose situation where they begin to fight each other, or what's left of them begins to fight each other. And one group has to say, we know we're outgunned, but if we keep taking it, we're going to get more quickly crushed. So we have to, quote unquote, change the equation by escalating. But when they escalate against a conventionally superior adversary, be it the US or the Israelis, they will get smacked down. Conversely, the other group will say, we need to absorb, because if we absorb, then we can kind of play dead, and we can wait them out like we did during Trump term 1. In this case, if they absorb, well, then you double down, you triple down, you make it into a lose-lose. If you get the Israelis and the Americans to agree to a script that is willing to put the Iranians into a lose-lose rather than offer them a lifeline, you could get to that regime change situation because of the high level of frustration. Again, the fact that the Iranian government is having to spend so much time to take down posts, to censor certain posts, to have to warn people to not listen to non-national news outlets tells you that even while they're getting shot at, they have a real fear of the collapse on the home front.
AJ has the only crystal ball that was made 1/3 in Tokyo, 1/3 in Tel Aviv, and 1/3 in Chicago. AJ, what do you foresee?
Um, I think it's highly dependent. So just for a context of where I come from, I usually take a look at modern warfare in terms of victories here. There's 3 potential victory conditions that can force someone to the table. The first would be the concern for the loss of civilian life. Basically, someone who's responsible in the military chain of command, they go, further fighting is going to endanger civilian life. That generally is not on the table with Islamo-fascist sort of regimes. It's not on the table with an Iranian regime like this. They view martyrdom as something that's totally acceptable in their campaign. So that's basically off the table. The second would be the inability to fight further, right? They don't have more materiel. They don't have more soldiers. That also is a long ways off when it comes to Iran or the regime. They have plenty of things to throw at the state for a good long while. And that's why we've seen people, I think, from Israel's security apparatus say that this could take weeks, take a couple of weeks. The last one is the loss of political support, the lack of a base of support. And I think that's something that's a victory condition that the state of Israel is going to push somewhat hard for, because the regime power rules in the Middle East. And if rule 1 is that power rules and power speaks, rule 1A is you can't lose to Jews, right? And when you start to lose to Jews in the Middle East, it is a heavy blow to your governing mandate. It's just a rule there. And so I think that the more Israel racks up strategic wins, the more there's going to be a push in the population to take this moment to overthrow the governing mandate of the Ayatollah. That would certainly end the war quicker. As to what would bring them to a negotiated settlement, it's very hard at this point to see. I think the facts change so quickly with this, because initially, yes, this was an operation, but initially Israel was incredibly surgical with its strikes on nuclear facilities and against people who supported the nuclear facilities. That would be the scientists and the head of in the top generals. Iran crossed a line for Israel yesterday, not only by shooting ballistic missiles, but by some of those actually getting through the system and injuring citizens. It now opened it up into a broader war campaign, right? And so now Israel's going to be in a position of necessarily hitting infrastructure targets, other targets, which is going to broaden this war and broaden the scope of it. So I think it's impossible to say how long it's going to last, but certainly regime change is one such victory condition. But the second is purely that, they've entered a war, they've entered a war conflict at the moment, and they're going to have to see it through to the point where Iran itself makes a political calculus of saying, hey, our regime is on shaky ground, because it's just never going to come to a loss of civilian life issue, and it's not going to come to a loss of materiel issue.
Hogan, how do you project forward?
Again, it depends on what the ultimate outcome or goal of Israel is in this conflict? Are they pushing for regime change? Do they wait for kind of a pause and try to get an off ramp there? Are they trying to completely destroy the nuclear capability? Are they trying to just hurt it, slow it? You saw them kind of strategically, surgically trying to attack a lot of the scientists who handle the program, those types of things. I don't know. But then you also have to think, and AJ's right, all those factors are there, all those possibilities are there. But then you also, I think, look at an outside force like America. Is America willing to get involved? Is Donald Trump willing to make a call to the folks over in Israel to have a discussion? Is he going to try and have a conversation with Iran as well and say, hold on, let's try and figure something out? I don't know. One of the things he put in his truth post, I think at the end, was Iran had a chance here. They blew it, but now there's another chance. Like, can we not try and get some type of peace here? So I think anybody's guess is as good as anybody else's guess. But I think it kind of comes down to what they ultimately want to achieve, and I don't know that they've stated that as clearly, other than preventing Iran from the nuclear weapon. How far does that go? Only time tells that.
Yeah, Michelle, thank you. I was struck today by the number of conversations amongst heads of government. And in general, the statements were either explicitly pro-Israel or not anti-Israel. And that includes in Europe, in the Middle East. So go around and ask each of you, who's another world leader? Leave the Iranians aside, leave Netanyahu aside, leave President Trump aside. Who's another world leader who you think is important here and you're curious to see how they handle it? Behnam.
I was actually, as you mentioned, the positive or at least neutral, not anti-Israel reporting. I was going to give a hat tip to either the German Foreign Ministry, and despite having some problematic, in my view, commentary on Gaza as of late, was at least willing to really call a spade a spade. It did not waffle when it came to Israel's right to defend itself, but more importantly, did not equalize between the Israeli attack on Iran and the Iranian attack on Israel. It full-throatedly condemned that. And the reason I'm saying this one is worth noting is that the Germans are a Western, if not Central European powerhouse. They're part of the European Troika. They were essential to get this very tough resolution at the International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors the morning before the Israeli strike on Iran. And they and their European counterparts, like the Brits and the French, will be critical if the Trump administration wants to use diplomatic pressure at the UN against the Iranians. And that's the snapback mechanism which expires. So I would say in this case, keep your eye on the Germans, which have traditionally been the weakest of this troika. And if their rhetoric is the strongest, it shows that, by simply being in office again, the Trump administration has multilateralized maximum pressure.
Couldn't agree more. And again, it runs counter to this impression that the president of the United States has so alienated Europe that they won't be allies. AJ, what world leader are you looking at?
I'm focused on the Gulf states. I'm really so I think I leave a lot of Western and NATO leadership in one bucket. It's going to greatly, their input is not going to be greater than the United States, right? And they're going to kind of move as the United States moves on this. And if the United States is any way hit in any sort of retaliation, the US can kick in that collective defense. So I'm actually far more concerned or interested in how the Gulf states, how the Arab states start to respond. If the tide starts to shift, do they really start moderating their language in support of regime change? Because I think, in terms of these victory conditions, the one that makes Israel most safe at the end of the day is new leadership. Because even if you want continued negotiations, the reason Israel took this action is because of a firm belief in the country that any agreement is not going to be held to by this leadership. And so ultimately, the end goal here that's most safe from an Israeli perspective is new leadership. Yep. So that can come about with the support of other Arab states trying to figure out how that power vacuum would be filled. But it's going to be very telling as to what they're able to say publicly, because again, the Arab states can say something publicly and something privately that are completely different. They often do because their populations politically respond to certain things. So you saw the Saudis condemn Israel's attack on Iran yesterday. I think the Saudis were jumping for joy internally. Yeah, I think, their political echelon were loving that. But they had to come out and, you can't say the Zionist aggressor is doing a great thing. If they start to moderate some of their public positions, that might be a great indication that they themselves are feeling on the street intel that things might be about to shift. So I'd love to, to continue to get their pulse on things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's important to remember how things would have been not that long ago, both in terms of the rhetoric, which, they're not praising Israel, but it's nothing like it would have been. It would have been, and also the threat to Israel is nothing like it would have been, in part because so many of the Iranian proxies have been diminished, and we've seen regime change in two important countries that have, I won't call them moderates, but not violently anti-Israeli leaders the way they would have had before. So I think all that is pretty positive. Hogan, what world leader are you interested in?
Saudi and Jordan obviously are interesting to me because of their proximity. But I'll tell you what's I'm thinking about just down the road, and that's China for some reason, because they buy like 80% of their oil from Iran. I'm interested at that partnership and dynamic too, because America having its arguments, if you will, with China and people really kind of pressing them through tariffs and other means here. That's an interesting part to me because they're not really involved at all, other than the fact that they prop up a lot of the Iranian regime with their economy. So while everyone said everything they should about the region and the other leaders close by, also Germany, great call there as well. But I'm interested to see kind of the posture from folks who do a lot of work or business with Iran going down the road, steps down the road.
Let me ask you, I'll throw this out to any of you who have a point of view about this. This morning, it was said that Benjamin Netanyahu was going to talk to a number of world leaders. He said himself that he talked to Modi, Starmer, Macron, Merz, Trump, but he also talked to Putin. And I'm wondering what you all think of that. I just wonder why it is he needs to talk to Putin on this occasion. Anybody have a sense of that?
Yeah, I can jump in here.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of variables at play with where Iran gets its support. So Iran is going to be gasping for some sort of support. It's going to be gasping for air in the form of foreign support. Hogan mentioned the Chinese. I think the Chinese have their hands full at the moment. They really don't want to get bogged down in the Middle Eastern mess. They're dealing with Trump's efforts at containment, and they also have ambitions with Taiwan. The Middle East they don't want that to be their backyard, and they have other sources of energy if they want to go to it, and they're building massive capacity of solar to try to offset that dependency. I think Bibi wants to shore up or at least keep a finger on the pulse of international opinion as to how things are going. Iran and Russia have been part of this axis that is anti-American. It's anti, sort of the Western coalition here. It's a smart move. One of the things that makes Bibi an excellent choice as leader for Israel, whether you like how he does it or not, is he's extremely adept at moving within the bounds of the international community, really being able to speak to a broad array of people. He is quite polarizing within the country, but there's no doubt that as a statesman, he's quite unmatched in his ability to actually reach out and speak to people. So I do think that that's part of the reason why he's doing everything he can to maintain a conversational, piece on all this, partially because this could become a drawn out campaign, right? If Iran wants to continue to push the envelope here, this could take a while. And so Iran's Axis partners, so to speak, are important to speak to, but also the U.S. Axis partners and emerging partners. That would be Modi, as you mentioned.
Yeah, interesting. Sean, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are and what's on your mind.
Thanks for having me on. I'm in Los Angeles, another Persian Jew. I was actually born in Israel. I have most of my family is in Israel at the moment. And I got to be honest, yesterday was a very emotional day for me personally. I was very anxious the whole night. But I woke up this morning, despite the news of what's going on right now in Israel with the sirens and some missiles coming through. I got to be honest, in the morning, I felt a huge sense of relief because this was something that was over every Israeli's shoulder. This huge weight of Iran. And over the course of the past year and a half, Israel happened to, they struck Hezbollah and, parts of Syria, and all the tentacles, so to speak, of Iran were struck, and even Iran itself to a certain limited degree. But finally, it feels like this weight of the pressure of the threat of Iran posing over Israel feels like that has dissipated, at least for me. Even though everybody in my family in Israel is still very anxious, and they're hunkered down, they're not going to work or synagogue or anything like that this coming Saturday. Just wanted to throw that out there. I haven't heard anybody the fact that this was probably Israel's last chance to do this, because not because of what Iran was doing, but because of the American administration. It's probably the Trump term is probably the last president who would okay this to a certain degree. I don't think any JD Vance, if he's kind of where the Republican Party is going, I don't think he would have approved this. And let alone, to be honest, any Democratic administration. So I haven't heard anybody say that. I just wanted to throw that out there. And my question would be, what steps at this point could Israel take to facilitate, put aside the military objectives of the war, of this, strike? What steps could they take to facilitate the people of Iran to rise up? Is there something else? I mean, I don't know, throwing pamphlets throughout the Iran, or what is it that could be done on that level to finally get the regime, overturned, by the people of Iran?
Yeah. First of all, you raised a number of things, and we'll get Behnam to comment on the last point about, Israel's pretty sophisticated, whether it's pamphlets or maybe more murder assassinations of leading figures. They could foster it, perhaps. I just want to highlight one of the things you said first, though, which is similar to what AJ said, a sense of anxiety and concern, and obviously we're all concerned for your relatives and hope they're just fine. Again, I've been to Israel. I'm familiar with this, but not as viscerally as you are. To have a hostile country in your neighborhood trying to develop nuclear weapons that they say they'll use against you, the psychological, that's like go back to Americans during the Cold War. The psychology of that is just, it's a massive burden, massive psychological burden and concern. And we've been talking about this for decades, how Israel working with the United States was going to address it. And we don't know how it's going to end, but it is, I'll say it's a little bit cathartic to be trying to solve an existential problem. I think it's understandable to have the kind of mix of emotions you described. Behnam, regime change. We've seen in the Arab Spring, and we saw, I guess it was 2 years ago, when that woman who was in custody was killed. Was that 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
2.5,
Yeah.
Amini.
Yeah. So in those cases, who knows how close there was to regime change? Probably not very, but there was at least the possibility, because we saw rising up. Are there things that Israel, maybe even the United States, covertly could do or overtly could do to try to bring about a greater uprising, which obviously would destabilize the regime at this time when they're dealing with an influx of attacks?
Sure. I certainly think there's a lot, both above board and below. First and foremost, Sean, Salam, great to meet you. Listen, I think there's a playbook for the US and a playbook for Israel. For the US, just look to the US Congress. Last month, there was actually a bill introduced called Maximum Support, with a whole host of great ideas, that would be complementary to the existing US policy towards the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is the maximum pressure policy. You marry maximum pressure, which is pressure from the top, with maximum support, which is supporting the Iranian people who are protesting from below. And then you can really begin to sandwich the regime to force them into that lose-lose equation. The challenge is there haven't been a lot of policymakers that have picked up these proposals, but there's lots of creative stuff in there. It's only been introduced. It's not law yet, but take a look. There's stuff like VPN, direct-to-cell access, talking about, both Trump and Biden, when they were in office in the past, have confiscated Iranian tankers and sold the oil and, used it to fill the budget deficit or pay money to victims of families of terrorism. Why not use the assets of the Islamic Republic, which are being generated to fund terrorism and its nuclear program, as a weapon against itself and fund a strike fund, much like President Reagan did way back in the Cold War with the Solidarity movement in Poland? The toxic combo of protests in the street and strikes in key industries is what actually collapsed the state leading up to the 1979 revolution in Iran. You can have a powerful combination, again, of protests and strikes really limit the room for maneuver for the regime. And this is something that I think Washington can do. And, Trump term 1 was actually quite good in terms of the rhetoric on this. Trump term 2 has, with respect, some room for improvement on. But, the easy lift would be to, help make this bill move and then make this part of U.S. policy. There's tons of other things like VPNs for when there's the internet filtering to potentially getting Starlink into Iran, smuggling that into Iran whenever they have those internet blackouts. You remember the 1,500 people that were killed in 6 days in protests in Iran in November 2019. Washington Post says democracy dies in the darkness. Well, it was Iranians who were dying in the darkness too, and no one simply gave a damn because that was actually a pro-American and a pro-Israel population that actually had common cause with President Trump back in term 1. On the Israelis, the Israelis have been doing a whole host of covert things in the past, the things that have gone bump or boom in the night in Iran that's popularly reported. But why not marry that? Why, instead of having like a random cyber attack on a gas station or a fuel pump facility or whatever on critical infrastructure, marry that with the next round of strikes or protests so that it has a much more magnified effect. If there is something kinetic, and the Israelis are doing stuff kinetic, as we just saw with the operation the other day, why not also go after a major IRGC base that is arresting people and beating people? That's the stuff that really puts wind beneath the wings of the protesting Iranians, because the difference is you don't need pamphlets, you don't need information. There's no shortage of information. This is a fundamentally different part about Iranian society compared to its neighbors. They know who their oppressors are and they know who they stand with. It's not an information problem. It's a capability and capacity problem.
Right. But I know you're going to need to leave pretty soon. I'm going to go to the other folks, AJ, just in saying, if you need to go while others are talking, you slip off. But with our gratitude, very grateful to stay as long as you can. But thank you for joining us. Really love having you. AJ, jump in. I'll just raise the issue that I want you and Hogan to both discuss, but you go wherever you want first. People are, in my mind, are squeamish about assassination. They're squeamish about fostering regime change. I've never understood it. I get international law. I get that we don't want people coming and killing the president of the United States. But if you've got a country like Iran, murderous, repressive, human rights violations on a massive scale, and you're gonna bomb them, I don't understand the squeamishness about it. And I've already gotten emails from things I've already said about it from thoughtful people. I get the other side, but I'd love for you both, you talk about whatever you want, AJ, but I'd love for you both to talk about the prospect of and how comfortable you are with assassinations of government officials.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. It's one that I've thought about actually over the last day. I want to preface this with just a response. So I want to answer it directly, and I also want to preface it with a response to something that was raised in the chat, which is, can we get a real Iranian to on the show? I think that was the wording. I know that it's not everyone's, everyone just has the role of providing for their family, putting food on the table, and they're not steeped in these issues all the time. But and so I'll do my best to provide as objective a context here as possible. According to any public available polling or data, about 80% of the Persian population, I'll call them the Persian population because they're not Arabs, they're very proudly Persians, are disapprove of the Islamic Republic regime, right? When we talk about, when you say, can we get a real Iranian on, 80% of the population do not support this terrorist police state. It's very similar to having a Gestapo in the country, right? The reason that it is violently oppressed, they do not support the regime. And so when you hear people talk about, regime change, it's the popular decision of the population. It's just a lack of capability to effect as such. So it's not a propaganda campaign. Mark having on people who are supportive of regime change from Iran, that's the popular decision on the street. as for assassination, I was asked this yesterday by someone who themselves they had a very similar question. Why don't you just assassinate the Ayatollah? After some thought, I think I came to the thought of taking a look at how Israel's approached Gaza and how Israel's approached Iran, one as a proxy actor and one as the main actor in two different ways. What could we learn from it? I think you never saw Israel pushing for popular support for regime change on the ground in Gaza because the population supported the governing mandate, right? It's kind of a flipped situation here. The population of Gaza by a super majority supports Hamas as a governing mandate. You weren't going to get them to go out into the streets and overthrow the government. It's completely the opposite when it comes to Iran, right? The population does not like the regime. Their governing mandate is based purely on police state power. And so there is a push to be able to affect this sort of regime change, the people have to take it themselves.
Yeah.
Because the alternative is it's seen as one of two ways. One, in which it was foisted upon them by either the great or little Satan. It plays into the propaganda, right? This is just a puppet of the Zionists, a puppet of the United States. The second is that you can bet of all of the contingency plans that Iran has gained out or the regime has gained out, it's what happens if someone is assassinated, right? Because they're very high profile assassinations by the Mossad and by Israel. There is going to be a line of succession or succession plan in place, right? As opposed to the top leadership brass, which was all wiped out in one go in these last days, and there's no command structure. Who's next in line as to take over the mantle from the Ayatollah is probably put into place, and probably with a group of loyalists who can clamp down on dissent. The far more likely to succeed option is a popular overthrow, not an assassination. I think that's why you haven't seen. I'm fully in support of assassination where assassination is proper. Right? Soleimani, was a good assassination. Hassan Nasrallah was a good assassination. But and I wish they could have assassinated the head of the Hamas political wings in Qatar, but they didn't want to start an issue with Qatar. But the Ayatollah is a figure, and you don't want to start having accusations that could derail the popular movement on the street, which is more likely to succeed of, this next guy or whoever is only because the Zionists or the great Satan put them there.
I agree with you, except I'm not as bullish on the prospects of a popular uprising as you are. Hogan,
just real
how
quickly,
do you feel about it? Yeah.
AJ's right. If it's done, from the ground up, if you would, from the people, the chance of it lasting and being, something that really does help shape the region for generations, that's the way it would go. Assassinations, while we can have our own opinions about them, they're like shark teeth. One tooth pops off, there's another one right behind it, just as sharp, just as deadly. The same thing applies for leadership in that region. They're gaming this out too. They're prepared for this type of thing because in the first Trump administration, Soleimani was a good example. They had someone, we took Soleimani out, boom, there was someone else there very quickly. So it's so much more. There's so much more of a potential for long-lasting change in the region if those regimes are taken down by the people and not another government. No question.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I say something?
Yes, please. Go ahead, Sean.
So, I'm just going to be honest. It doesn't, the popular uprising, in my opinion, is not enough because that's happened for 40 years. It happened in 2009, and President Obama, for what I think that was the best chance we had, the Iranians had to overthrow the regime, was in 2009, the Green Revolution. But they need outside support. I think that's just the reality. The regime in Iran is not like these other regimes where a popular uprising, I think, could do it, where we had the Arab Spring in 2011 and 12 and where different regimes fell. I just think it's a little different in Iran, and the reality, at least for me, is other countries need to overtly at this point support it. Otherwise, it probably will never happen.
Yep.
That's just my take.
Well said. Grateful to you again. We're thinking about your family and appreciate you coming on and sharing all that. AJ and Hogan, I couldn't be more grateful to you both for spending this hour with us and sharing, as always, your thoughts and perspective and experience. And look forward to having you back whenever you're available. So thank you both.
Thanks.
Okay. We may come back to you on the weekend. Of course, we got the president, the military parade tomorrow. You've got these demonstrations around the country. Check my Substack and Twitter feed, X feed, for notifications because we may do some special reports. If not, Sean Dan and I will be back Monday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern time, and of course, this show will be on Monday night. And got a new show to tell you about, which we'll tell you about on Monday. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. Thank you for spending this time with us. Thank you for a great week on the platform and for all the participation from the community. Really, really grateful for everybody. And don't put smack in the chat. Have a great night, a great weekend, and we'll see you by Monday, maybe before. Good night.